Hello and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast. This is where you'll find extended versions of my interviews on public television. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today, is the clean energy revolution finally here? For decades, conversations about climate have been filled with apocalyptic scenarios and hopelessness, warming temperatures, rising sea levels, political gridlock, not to mention the end of the polar bears. But finally, there's also some reason for optimism. I mean, not for the polar bears, but over the past decade, renewable energy has exploded. Technology is improving, costs are plummeting, and this is now the fastest energy transition in human history. In 2024, 96% of global demand for new electricity was met by renewables. Between January and May of this year, China added by itself enough solar and wind power to generate as much electricity as Turkey or Indonesia. And Europe has rapidly scaled up in response to Russia cutting off the gas tap after they invaded Ukraine in 2022. But despite the economic, climate, and geopolitical incentives, the Trump administration is doubling down on fossil fuels. What happens if the United States puts the brakes on clean energy just as the rest of the world hits the gas? Or should I say, plugs in the solar batteries? In the race to power the future, do we risk being left in the dark? I'm joined on the show today by Bill McKibben. He's an environmentalist and author whose new book, Here Comes the Sun, argues that renewables aren't just a climate fix, they're a political and economic opportunity to reshape our future. Let's get to it. Bill McKibben, welcome to GZERO World.
It's very good to be with you.
A lot of the people that are talking about global climate are in various degrees of despondence, not enough money being spent and committed, not moving fast enough, people not taking it seriously. Your latest book, you are striking more of a note of optimism. Explain to our audience how that came to be.
Well, unusual for me because my general role in the world is professional bummer-outer of other people. I wrote the first book about climate change back in the 1980s. And there is much to be bummed out about. The planet really is unraveling in real time ecologically. And, you know, in our country, we're living through a kind of flickering of our democracy. So I have more than enough things to keep me awake at night. But there is one big good thing simultaneously happening on the planet, big enough that it might address at least some of both our climate crisis and our democracy crisis, and that is the sudden, unexpected, and overwhelming surge in renewable energy across the planet. This is the fastest energy transition the world has ever seen. The last 36 months, which is really when it's taken place, have happened so dramatically that I think in many cases we kind of have missed the story just by the speed that it's happening. But just to give you an example of what's going on. In China in May, which is the last month for which we have good data, they were putting up 3 gigawatts of solar power a day. Now, a gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a coal-fired power plant. So they were building the solar equivalent of one of those every 8 hours. In California, the only part of our country that's taken this most seriously, they reached some kind of tipping point in the last 10 months or so. Now, most days, California supplies more than 100% of its power for long periods from clean energy. At night, when the sun goes down, the biggest source of supply to the grid is batteries that didn't exist 3 years ago. California, 4th largest economy in the world, is using 40% less natural gas to make electricity than they were 2 years ago. That's the kind of number applied globally that begins to shave tenths of a degree off how hot the planet gets. And remember, every tenth of a degree moves another 100 million people out of a safe climate zone and into a dangerous one. I'm not telling you that we're going to stop global warming. I'm just telling you we finally have a scalable way to attack here.
we're already well into global warming. I'm not trying to get you to make that argument, but I mean, my understanding, I mean, obviously renewable energy, part of the reason why so much more is being done and the investments are growing is because the costs are coming down, right? And I mean, this is an area where everything we see, the technology is improving dramatically at scale, where that doesn't seem to be the case with fossil fuels. They don't seem to be getting particularly cheaper or much more advanced. Is that still
You're
the
absolutely
case?
right. You're absolutely right. And what it highlights is the difference in kind between these two things. Fossil fuel is a resource, and it gets harder to get over time. You have to go further back in the coal mine to find some more coal. Renewable energy is the opposite. It's basically, the resource is basically human intelligence. You get better at building the infrastructure to catch the sun's rays. Every time we double the amount of solar power on the planet, we drop the price in half. And that learning curve seems to be going, if anything, faster than ever right now. It's an extraordinary gift. And that learning curve crossed the line sometime 5 years ago or so, where it became cheaper to do this than to burn stuff. We live on a planet, though we haven't really let it sink in yet, we live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun.
Now, when I look at the International Energy Agency and other similar organizations over the past 10, 20 years, they have consistently underestimated how quickly we are going to see an expansion of renewables because they're doing straight line estimates and they're not taking into account these technological improvements. If you take into account the technological improvements and you put your crystal ball in front of you, Bill, how long before you believe a majority of the planet's energy is coming from post-carbon renewable sources?
If we do all that we can, by at least the middle of the next decade, maybe sooner. But that said, there are forces trying to keep us from getting there, and they're most prominent in the United States, where under the Trump administration, we're now all but banning solar and especially wind power. We just shut down big, almost completed wind farms off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So there's a real fight underway here. And your question is really the key question, because if we're worried about climate change, pace is the thing that matters most. 30 years from now, I have no doubt that we're going to run the planet on sun and wind simply because of economics. But if it takes us anything like 30 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind is going to be a broken planet. We're already seeing huge damage everywhere.
What's the gap? I mean, if it takes you, because you said it might be the middle, if we do what we can, it might be the middle of the next decade, but it might be 30 years. So we're talking about, a gap of, let's say 20 years or 15 years. What's the difference, your estimate, in what that means for peak temperature rise on the planet, the delta between those two outcomes?
So, I mean, who knows for sure, because this is an experiment we haven't done before, but right now, the trajectory that we're on at the moment takes us to 3 degrees Celsius in the course of this century. So our job is to cut that back as much as we can. The deeper question, and even harder question to answer, is what's the delta in damage? Because once we go past certain tipping points, the absolute temperature gets less important. I mean, the questions we have to be asking ourselves are things like, is the Arctic still intact? Or has it melted so much, which we're beginning to see now, that things like the jet stream are profoundly affected. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us a couple of years ago that if we wanted to stay on anything like the trajectory that we'd set out in Paris 10 years ago, we needed to cut emissions in half by 2030. 2030, by my watch, is now 4 years and 4 months away. But now we have a technology that allows us to at least think about how we might move in that direction. And you can watch it starting to happen in China. China, which has embraced this wholeheartedly, embraced what, remember, is an American technology. I mean, the first solar cell was built in Edison, New Jersey in 1954. The first commercial wind turbine was 30 miles south of my house in Vermont in the 1940s. But it's China that's become the world's first electro state. And it's not just that they're great at now building fast, big solar and wind installations. It's that they're learning how to use that flood of cheap, clean energy to run everything around them. The best example, of course, is e-vehicles and e-bikes. Half the cars sold in China last month came with a plug hanging out the back. And that's quickly defining the automotive market, especially for the developing world.
And they're better cars, they're cheaper cars than the Americans and the Europeans make, absolutely.
We think Detroit is the center of the automotive world, but actually it's three cities in China whose names are hard to pronounce.
Absolutely. So I take no issue with what you're saying about how much China has invested, is planning to continue to invest in these technologies. I do see, though, that China continues to also build a lot of additional coal plants. And I mean, when I look at artificial intelligence and China's data centers, which are going to be incredibly energy thirsty, best estimates I get from people that understand this is that most of that AI is going to be powered in China by coal. And in the United States, it's going to come from gas. So what do we do about that?
I think probably not in the case of China anyway. They build some new coal capacity, but they're actually burning less coal than they did. And the coal is the second or third tier power that they go to if they're run short of solar or wind because it's more expensive. So those plants are idle a lot of the time. Now in the US, if we're going to go ahead with building big data centers, and I guess it looks like we are, despite the fact that I think it's pretty unclear just how valuable that technology is turning out to be. If we're going to do it, the only way we can do it is to build them with sun and wind. You can't build fast enough to keep up with the pace of those things. And that's what we're finding out in this country this year. The price of electricity is up 10% across America so far in 2025. That's because we have an increase in demand from things like data centers, and we've artificially constrained the supply because the president has said we're not going to build sun and wind. So look, you don't have to be a Nobel Prize economist to know that if demand goes up and you constrain supply, price is going to be the place where that makes the difference. It's why I think that eventually we will blink here and start building renewable energy fast, because if we don't, then 10 years from now, the U.S. will be the colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, where those tourists who can still get a visa come to gawk at how people used to live in the olden days, But I think before that we will blink, because we'll figure out that we can't really have a competitive economy if our major input, energy, costs more than everybody else's.
Now, you talked about California as a place that has continued to embrace a lot of this transition. Texas, of course, which produces a lot of fossil fuels, but Texas has also been a leader in the United States for renewable energy. So, now a lot of people that vote in Texas vote for Trump. How is it that the United States is turning against an energy that so many Texans are making money out of and working in?
Texas is such an interesting case, because you're right, they're now the fastest growing part of the clean energy economy in this country. The Texans are doing it because they have a wide open market and because they need the grid stability that comes with renewables and batteries. The fossil fuel industry has tried to use its weight in the Texas legislature to stop that. They had a series of bills this spring, the most important of which people started calling DEI for natural gas, because it would have required people who wanted to put up 5 megawatts of solar to also put up 5 megawatts of gas. Everybody thought it would pass because of the power of the oil industry. But in fact, people started coming out of the woodwork, especially from rural Texas to Austin, saying, don't do this. This is how we pay the school taxes in our town. This is the way we keep the old folks' home open. This is the center of our economy. Don't do this. And the legislature walked away from it and passed none of those bills. And so it'll be fascinating to see. The head of the Energy Reliability Council of Texas earlier this summer said, we're not going to have any more blackouts the way we've had in past years in Texas. The chances of them are greatly reduced because of this flood of clean energy and the batteries that store it. Batteries are going down in price just as fast as solar panels and wind turbines. And they're the key part of this. I mean, essentially, they mean that the sun shines all day and all night.
Now, when you have lots of jobs and companies that are investing lots of money in renewables in California and in Texas, when the market's wide open, why aren't we seeing the industries that are benefiting from this spending more money and lobbying more effectively to get the outcomes that they clearly want? Because, I mean, if you're saying that the United States is doubling down on being a petrostate, that implies that the fossil fuels are doing a much better job in lining the corridors with cash than the new industries.
You'll recall that last summer, President Trump, then candidate Trump, had a not very secret meeting with oil executives where he told them in a kind of Austin Powers moment, you give me $1 billion and I'll give you anything you want. They ended up providing about $500 million by the time you add up donations, advertising, lobbying in the last election cycle. And that was clearly enough. They've used the thing they have, ready cash flow, to game our political system, which, not to be cynical here, but our political system is way easier to game than it should be. And as a result, we're seeing a series of really boneheaded policy decisions, one after another, from the White House and from Congress. These will be hard to recover from. We're losing a race. It's not that the Chinese are eating our lunch, we're catering the lunch for them. If we were trying to design a policy to help Xi Jinping and China, we could not be doing a better job than we're doing right now.
We've talked a lot about the United States and China. So far, that's been it in terms of geographies. The Europeans, for a very long time, have been talking the best talk about the need to move to transition energy, and yet the growth isn't there. The investments aren't close to the size of what we see in China. Lord knows they're not as advanced technologically. Why not? Where did they go wrong?
There's actually been, in the last 2 years, just an explosion of renewable energy across Europe. A lot of it triggered by the invasion of Ukraine, when people suddenly realized that they couldn't rely on cheap natural gas from Russia henceforth. Yeah. And so it's happened at every level. I mean, there are parts of the EU, Spain and Portugal, that produce prodigious amounts of clean energy. Britain closed down its last coal-fired power plant last fall and replaced it with a renewable energy park. The wind from the North Sea is going to be their ticket going forward. Germany, nobody's ever gone to Germany for a beach vacation that I know of, but they're one of the leading solar countries on Earth. And it's not just big solar fields. They do it at every scale. One of the most remarkable things about Germany that's spread across Europe in the last 2 years is what we're calling balcony solar. This is for apartment dwellers. You go to whatever they call Best Buy in Stuttgart, and you come home with, for a few €100, a solar panel designed not to go on the roof, but just to hang over the railing of your apartment balcony. And it just has a plug that you plug into the wall. No electricians, no rewiring, nothing. Often provides 25% of the power that a household is using.
And what does that cost? What does it cost to buy that?
400 euros, 500 euros.
Why don't people do that in the United States? That seems like a fairly obvious market niche.
It does. It's illegal everywhere in the U.S., except in that hippie progressive bastion, the state of Utah, which earlier this year, by unanimous vote of the state legislature, passed enabling legislation. Some state senators stood up and said, if you can, the good people of Hamburg get to do this, why not the good people of Provo? And now they can. And you go on YouTube, you can find lots of videos of happy Utahns unrolling their balcony solar.
How is it not legal in Texas? I mean, they hate the nanny state. They don't like it when the government tells you you can't do stuff. I mean, you can shoot at anything in Texas. How can you not have whatever energy you want? I don't get it.
It's what we're trying to get across on Sunday. We just need the buy-in from local regulators. This is the big problem with home solar of all kinds in America. It costs 3 times as much to put up here as it does in the EU or Australia. It's not because the panels are expensive. That's a tiny fraction of the cost. It's because we have 15,000 different municipalities, each with their own permitting and licensing scheme and teams of inspectors, and it takes weeks, and they've got other things to do. I mean, most of the world, if you want solar panels on your roof, you call up Monday, and by Friday, your contractor has them plugged in and pumping electricity. That's why 40% of homes in Australia have solar panels. We actually have a remedy for this. It's something the National Renewable Energy Laboratory came up with a couple of years ago called Solar App Plus that they've since spun off into a nonprofit. It's an app that lets a contractor plug in what kind of equipment he's putting on what address, and if the computer says that's okay, you get an instant permit to go. California, New Jersey, and Maryland have already mandated this. We're determined to spread it to the rest of the country. That's one of the tasks for Sunday.
And what is the ostensible argument that's being made for why a Texan can't put a solar panel in their house? Is it a fire hazard? What is it saying?
I think that's what people would say. That's what the building codes are based on. But you know that it's not a serious issue because, as I said, 40% of Australians have this stuff on their roof. If it was a big fire risk, you can take for granted that Fox News would be showing you pictures of it 24/7. These are.
But 40% of Australians have venomous snakes in their garage, so we can't trust what they do.
It's true. Crocodiles everywhere. It is true. This stuff is really safe. It shouldn't be harder than getting a new refrigerator, and yet we have a big, cumbersome system around it. A lot of it's just inertia. You know, the combination of vested interest and inertia are big problems that we can't overcome in the short term anything in Washington. We're not going to get the IRA back with its federal tax credits for this kind of stuff, not anytime soon. But we can overcome some of this inertia at the state and local level, and we better.
What are things that you do that are kind of forward and future oriented on climate that most people would find common sense if they thought about it? You personally.
So we've had solar panels on my house for a quarter century, and they work fantastic. I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to try and say this in a way that gets across to people how simple the future could be. At the moment, if you want to drive a car, a normal internal combustion car, the process that you need to allow that is enormous. You have to be able to basically, have a system that can drill for oil miles beneath the surface of the ocean, get it up to a refinery, which is probably the most complicated piece of machinery in the world, refine it into its parts, ship them out to gas station somehow. Your car shows up at the gas station, you fill the tank, and then you have thousands of moving parts to control this ongoing fire that, spark plugs to get the pistons in the cylinders firing away. And even then, you only use about 30% of the energy for motion. Most of it's just waste heat coming out the exhaust pipe. On my house, the solar panels have a cord that goes to my EV in the garage through an inverter. And every night when I get home, I plug it in. And overnight, it fills up with inexpensive electricity off the roof. And then the next morning, when I go to drive it, the 20 moving parts in the vehicle propel my car more quietly, more quickly, more smoothly than any car I've ever driven before. And they do it 3 or 4 times more efficiently in terms of the use of energy than a gas-driven car. This same kind of elegance is true for the other crucial appliances we need going forward. The heat pump in our house is way better than the furnace we used to have in the basement. Cheaper to run, quieter, produces heat and cooling by taking the latent heat in the atmosphere around us and using some electricity to amplify it. I'm the cook in our house, so for years, I've been using induction cooktop in the kitchen, $60 from Amazon for an induction cooktop. It boils water twice as fast as the open flame we used to have, and probably just as important since we have a young grandchild now, kids raised in homes with gas in the kitchen get about twice as likely to get asthma, which if you think about it for a little while, makes sense. You've got a open campfire in your kitchen. That's not great. So the future that we could be having is remarkable at the smallest level in your home, but it's also remarkable at the largest level. I mean, just think for a minute what the geopolitics of the world would have been like over the last 70 years if oil was of relatively trivial value. How much would we have, how many fewer wars and coups and assassinations and terrorist plots and everything would we have endured if we ran the world on an energy source, sun and wind, that's available to everyone everywhere, that can't be hoarded or held in reserve, that's just there? I'm not trying to sound utopian. I'm not utopian about any of this, but I think that there's a real chance to put the world on a sounder footing than the one it's on now.
Bill McKibben, happy Sunday to you.
Many, many thanks. What a good pleasure to talk with you.
That's it for today's edition of the GZERO World Podcast. Do you like what you heard? Of course you do. Why not make it official? Why don't you rate and review GZERO World? 5 stars, only 5 stars, otherwise don't do it. On Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends.